I'm really pleased to introduce Shola Aladipo, registered dietitian and CEO of Food for Purpose, for this next section for this evening. So Shola is going to take us through the what, the when, the how, and the where of the chances of developing type 2 diabetes, the risks and what you can do about it. So Shola, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. So let me just start with this myth, and I don't know if you've heard it, Joan, but I certainly have. Black don't crack. Or, to put it in simpler terms, Black people tend to look very young. 50 is the new 30. Our skin doesn't wrinkle as quickly as our white counterparts. And often, because we feel well and we look well, we really often feel that we have no risk of getting type 2 diabetes, and actually being a little bit thicker or carrying some extra weight is a positive thing. But actually, as we'll note from the quiz, this isn't actually true. And just because you feel well, and indeed, of course, ladies and gents, you look amazing, but actually there are processes that are often going on in our bodies, particularly when we're carrying extra weight. And this session will just be touching on some of those things. So these are the things that we can actually change, particularly pertaining to our weight. So what we eat, when we actually eat, how we eat, where we eat, and of course, how we live. So the first thing I think it's really important under what we eat is just to say that there is nothing wrong with our foods. Joan, as a dietitian of over 25 years, we get to the point where I'm tired of hearing people saying, the food from Africa and the Caribbean, there's something wrong with them. Our foods are fantastic. We're blessed with a plethora of lovely, starches and carbohydrates, fantastic vegetables and fruits. So we should be enjoying those traditional foods. Nothing wrong with them at all, but it's actually what we need is balance. So we want to balance those amazing foods because we want to manage our weight. So you can enjoy your traditional foods. And I refer to the Eat Well guide because although it isn't really pinpoint in a lot of our traditional foods, it is really guiding us around those food groups. And it is a good example of balance. So we do see immediately that are, on the yellow section with our starchy foods, our carbohydrates, we do see that they are actually permitted. They are allowed as part of a healthy diet. So it's quite important that we are having carbohydrate. Of course, we want to balance that, and we don't want to have too much. We don't want to overload on our carbohydrates. And then, of course, fruit and vegetables, extremely important, in different forms and shapes. So frozen, whether they're fresh, tinned, are very, very convenient. Of course, just being careful, when we're thinking about what they're canned in or tinned in, whether they're tinned in water or salt, that's important. We can get a lot of our fruit and vegetables now actually tinned in water. And then, of course, our proteins. A lot of the time, I certainly note with our Black African Caribbean communities that we're a little bit heavy-handed on our protein. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't need that much meat, although it can be lovely and the chicken is amazing. However, because we're not actually growing like children are, we don't actually need that much protein. So you can see here that, looking at this Eat Well guide, it's quite a moderate consideration for our protein. And then, our dairy and alternatives are really important. You can see this tiny little purple section for oils and spreads. Again, we're not saying you can't use any fats, but it really is about lowering that amount purely because we know that fat is high in calories. And if we're having a lot of it, that just means that we are going to be prone to gain excess weights. And of course, we know we're looking at snacks, really reducing the amount of those, chocolates, crisps and things. Again, they're not outlawed, but it really is about that balance, really about balance, having enough fluid, staying very well hydrated, plenty of water, water, water. We know, don't we, that we love our punches and we love those sweet drinks, but actually they give us unnecessary calories. Why not eat the fruit? Eat the fruit instead of pulping it and having it as a juice. So, people often do wonder and worry. And Joan, I find, post-COVID, people are really asking, what about diets? Can I just say, and this does sound a bit controversial, diets actually do work because we're doing something to change what we're eating. And often diets are lowering calories and they're making us do something that we wouldn't normally do. And of course, your body will often respond by losing weight, but a diet tends to be short term. So that weight loss tends to be short term. And when considering diets, we really ought to think about the short term versus the long term benefits and consequences. And when people ask me, which diet should I go on? We do know that, in terms of weight loss, ketogenic diets have been shown to help people to lose weight, but it's hard to stay on them for a long time. And there are some health risks involved with them. We don't know about the long-term consequences, but we do know people can feel a bit tired and perhaps also be lacking in certain vitamins and minerals. And then there's the whole low carbohydrate debate, Joan. We could go on with that forever. But I will say that carbs are not outlawed. We've just seen the Eat Well plate. It's really important that we are having a moderate amount of carbohydrate because our bodies need energy. However, just lowering our carbohydrates alone would be focusing too much on just one group. And again, we're looking at a variety of foods. So moderate carbohydrate is absolutely fine. And I know some people are actually frightened of carbohydrates. And it's just important to remember, I'll show you another part later on in the session where how we can model our plates to ensure that we're having a moderate amount of carbohydrate. And then of course we've got intermittent fasting, and I must say, over the years this has really come into vogue, and I think there's a little bit more research now that's showing us that intermittent fasting can actually work quite well. Be sensible about it, do get good advice, but you can actually maintain quite a healthy weight with sensible intermittent fasting. Again, it's about allowing your body to be in a fasted state and having a window of eating. And there's good research to show that this can work. However, it's about a lifestyle change. And if you're popping in and out, you'll find that your weight will bounce up and down. And then to pills, powders and potions, just Google them. And Google isn't always your friend when it comes to, pills, powders and potions. I will say again, you'll probably get that quick spike of losing weight, but then what will happen is the weight will pile back on because a lot of the time these are not sustainable. So we don't actually want you particularly to be on a diet as such. It's about healthy eating for a long-term change.
So, Shola, that was magnificent. Thank you very much. And one word I heard you saying over and over again was balance. And I think that is such a key message about what we're eating. So, as you rightly said, our traditional foods are healthy foods, full of vitamins, nutritionally complete, but it's how we're eating them, how we're preparing them, and the quantity, I think, as well. So, it's not that the food is not healthy, it's about the amount sometimes. So, I mean, Shola, I'm sure you've been in the situation, you're at a party or with your family, the plate is full of jollof rice or rice and peas. What would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Parties are definitely one thing, aren't they? And, these eat as much as you like buffets and whatever really can be a bit of a stickler for us. What I'd say with that is imagine your plate and cut with your mind, divide your plate in half and say to yourself that half of this plate will be vegetables. And this is vegetables, can I say, that are undressed. So your salads or your steamed vegetables that are not dressed or steeped in oily dressings. And just say to yourself, half of that plate will be vegetables because they tend to be lower in calories. They tend to actually fill us up because they're higher in fiber. And also, great way to get part of our 5 a day in. And then the other half of your plate, divide that into 2 sections in your mind. And 1/4 of that will be your protein. So, your fish, your chicken, or your beans. And then the other part, that last quarter will be our carbohydrates. So our rice, our plantain, our fufu, green banana. So these are not outlawed foods, but we don't need as much of them when we're partying. Don't feel afraid to ask your host or hostess how the food has been cooked. Remember, your body is a gift. And just as you wouldn't go to the petrol garage, would you, and just plonk any fuel in, you'd say, oh, I'll make sure I'm putting the unleaded into the car. Ask people, is it possible to have this, steamed? Can I have a smaller portion? Ask, because, your body is your gift.
Thank you, Shola. And another tip I heard of was if you're going to a party, let's say it's like a buffet, and normally what goes on first is the rice. And if rather than going to that end of the buffet, cause some disruption there, go to the other end where the salad tends to be the last thing that's put on your plate and it's squeezed onto your plate, and have more of that than you would have of the rice.
100.
Sorry, Shola, yes, you were saying you would agree with that.
100. I'm totally agreeing with you, Joan, absolutely.
Yeah, so, okay, and it's about the portion sizes. We've said it's about the way it's cooked, but please do not stop eating your traditional food. That is part of our history, and it's something that we want to celebrate and something that we want to acknowledge as well. So that's absolutely fantastic, Shola. So now I'd like you to tell us about why we eat.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joan. And that's $1 million question, isn't it, really? Why are we eating? But it's really important that we are considering what's driving our food choices. A lot of the time we are eating, but we're out of control. A lot of the time we're not recognizing the difference between our body that is hungry and needing fuel, that balanced plate that we talked about, versus our appetite, i.e. something that we fancy. And our appetite can be because of all sorts of reasons. Sometimes we are eating because we're sad. Sometimes we're eating because we're happy. Joan, have you ever walked into the cinema and you've already had a lovely meal? You walk into the cinema and what's that first smell that wafts over you? Popcorn. And you think to yourself, why would I be eating this? But it's often the mood that we're in. And often, a lot of the time, when we say, who's an emotional eater? A lot of us will say, oh, I'm not. I think that most of us are actually emotional eaters, driven often by how we feel. And the other thing about why we eat is around our eating habits. And these are often born from our cultures, but also from childhood. Why we eat is often because we're told that this is the time to eat, this is the way to eat, this is how we ought to eat. So there are lots of questions that we now need to be asking ourselves as adults and really beginning to address. One key area is that we should be asking ourselves is, how in control am I of my eating? Because we should really be in charge. And there's a lot of research now around mindful eating. And really, without sort of sounding very complex, it's just about you being in charge and understanding why you're eating and eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. So eating when you're hungry for food. And oftentimes, Joan, we are hungry, but we're hungry for other things. And the lockdown has been a great example, hasn't it? A lot of people have said, they've been to the fridge but not because they were hungry. Sometimes it's boredom, sometimes it's not knowing what to do with yourself. And it's just recognizing that, am I actually hungry for food, or is it company? Is it because I need to do something with my hands? And it's recognizing those things. And the other thing about mindful eating is our speed. A lot of the time, I remember, Joan, as a child being told, come on, hurry up, finish your food, hurry up, clear that plate. And I think there's something about us harnessing the speed with which we're eating. So slowing down to pause between bites. I know certainly in the African culture, a lot of our foods tend to be what we call swallows. And therefore, a lot of the time it's a bolus and it literally is swallowed. But even with your swallow, slow down and savor that food before you do the action of swallow. Enjoy the texture, enjoy the stew that's around, embracing that lovely bolus of amala or fufu. Enjoy that. Chew your food, make it last, make the meal last. Some scientists say make your meal last at least 20 minutes, at least 20 minutes. Notice the smell. I mean, we have amazing seasonings and, lovely aromas. Notice those. And also notice and note any emotional triggers around you. Are you in an environment where everyone's eating quickly and therefore you feel that you ought to be eating quickly? Are there people that are around you that trigger more eating? Have you got groups of friends actually that are foodies? This is a time that you need to be a lot more mindful and actually perhaps spend some less time around them, or have your meal before you go out with people that may trigger your eating habits. And we need to try to avoid this autopilot eating. So it's the cinema situation, it's the after church situation. You're not hungry, but after church, Sister Susie always makes that lovely goat curry. Everyone's gone downstairs to the church hall, but you know that you're not hungry, and you know that you've got that lovely stir fry ready at home. So avoid that autopilot eating. In other words, feel free to say no. Balancing your plate, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Joan, but just for people to want to have a visual, this is what your plate should look like. And this is about you being mindful of what's going in. So we've got 50% for our veggies, a quarter of our plate for our meat, fish, or the alternatives, your beans, and then your carbohydrates, your rice, your plantain, your dasheen, that can go on your plate. So nothing is outlawed. It's just about you being in control of that balance.
Thank you so much, Shola. And I absolutely love the idea of mindful eating, because I think in a way, so many times, so many of us do that on automatic pilot. It's this time, so I must eat. It's this situation, so I must eat. And, and I love that hunger. What are we actually hungry for? Are we hungry for company? Are we hungry for those we've lost? Are we hungering for stress, for sadness? Is it actually food? And sometimes it's actually fluid. Sometimes we just are actually thirsty, and we think we're hungry. So it's absolutely a wonderful idea that maybe somebody tonight can take hold of and just stop and think before you start to eat. And yes, I love what you said also about it taking 20 minutes, because I think the studies have shown that it takes 20 minutes for what you're eating to actually message your brain that some fuel is coming in. So if you finished your meal within 20 minutes, your brain has hardly had time to register that it's got some fuel on board. So I think all of those things are fantastic advice, Shola. Anything else you wanted to tell us about that?
Do you know what, Joan? I just think in terms of mindful eating, I think particularly for our cultures, the beauty is if we change as adults, it can actually help our children. Because as I said, eating habits start when we're young. And if we're told, come on, hurry up, clear that plate, finish that plate, we're teaching our children already how not to be mindful. So instead of rushing them, give them time, because a lot of the time we feel, oh, you're too slow, hurry up. Give children time, give the family time, talk about the food. And it doesn't tend not to be something that we tend to do a lot in our culture, but actually talk, particularly to children, about the food. Doesn't this taste lovely? Can you taste that seasoning? Can you taste, isn't that lovely? Just so that children start to understand that the eating is not just food going into the mouth and down the throat. It's a whole sensory experience.
Yeah, that's a wonderful message, Shola. Thank you very much. So now you're going to tell us about when we eat. So I'm going to hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. So when we eat, and I will say timing and routine is so important. It's so interesting in this sort of modern microwave age that we have now tried to cram so much more into our busy lives. And often the thing that gets shirked or moved or re-agended is eating. We squeeze that meeting in, don't we? We neglect that need to have a quick drink because we'll maximize the time. Let's use more time. But I think there's something again about going back, prioritizing ourselves, our body's fuel, and actually thinking about having times and routines for eating. And of course, even with mindfulness, you do want to look at that routine and say, well, actually, this is the time I'd have breakfast. I'm not quite hungry. I can put it back. But we do need a structure and a framework. Haphazard eating at the moment is one of the main causes, or lack of routine is one of the main causes, I feel, of weight gain. And our bodies do not react well when we move from a routine or we're haphazard eaters. The body gets so confused and doesn't know what to do. And your body thinks, do you know what? I'll just package this for him. I'll package this for her because you might need it later, because your body's not sure what's going on. And the body goes into this mode where it conserves. It thinks it's doing you a favor by conserving that food and storing more fat for you. It's really important in terms of when we eat to spread our meals across the day. Now, I know some people out there may be thinking, oh my goodness, but I hate breakfast. I can't eat breakfast. And, you know, I do understand that, but think about your body needing fuel. So those of you that do struggle with breakfast, it may be that you just need to move the time a little bit later, perhaps taking a nice piece of fruit into work with you, something like a banana, or taking yourself a shake, something that you can eat, something that's maybe not too heavy. So maybe a slice of bread. Without fueling your body in the morning, what you're not doing is breaking the fast. The reason that breakfast is called break fast is because your body has been fasting overnight. So since your last meal, your body's been fasting. And if you've been sleeping and having a good amount of sleep, sometimes our bodies are fasting for about 10 to 12 hours since our last meal. And what you're saying to your body, if you're not eating your breakfast, is, I'm not giving you anything. And often what our bodies try to do, again, our bodies are always trying to adjust. What often happens is your body tries to help you by conserving less energy because it thinks it's doing you a favor. And therefore, when you do eat, your body gets a little bit confused again. It's not sure whether to package or conserve that energy, to save it for you as fat, as an energy store, or to actually burn it. So having breakfast is quite an important part of our day, and spreading our meals. I know a lot of African Caribbean cultures, we tend to have that heavy meal in the evening. And it just means that we're asking our body to do a lot of hard work in one go. It's a great thing, I think, Joan, and I've tried this as well, at home with a family, to have the heavier meal where we can in the afternoon. It particularly worked during lockdown, and having something lighter in the evening. But whichever way works for you, ensure that you're spreading your meals. So 3 meals a day, leaving at least 4 hours between each meal. We don't have to snack, contrary to popular views. We don't have to snack, but if you do want to snack, just think about what you're snacking on, and of course going for lower calorie foods, so fruit and vegetables. And of course, remember, just as you said, Joan, people can be you might be thirsty, so ensure that you're bringing in time, setting times for yourself to drink. Set yourself a goal, that I'm going to drink 1.5 liters today. I'm going to spread it across the day. Going to bed on time, I cannot overemphasize this, is so important. There are quite a few studies now that are showing that people who tend to sleep later tend to have a higher risk for not just overweight, but actually type 2 diabetes. So it's really important that we're going to bed on time, having this routine whereby your body knows it's time to rest. What often happens is when we're awake, our bodies think, oh, hang on, Shola's still awake. Maybe she needs some more energy. And there are hormones and chemicals in our bodies that are sending messages and thinking if she's not sleeping, then she should be eating. And those hormones levels can get quite confused in our bodies. And therefore, it's really important that we are setting a time that we stop eating and we're getting a good amount of sleep before our next meal. Planning is everything. Do plan for your meals. Do have a family menu. It can sound ridiculous, but it can really help you when you think, oh, don't know what to cook today. So, and shop according to your plan. Have a plan. A lot of families I know now do have a plan. Sunday, we know what we're having. Monday, we know what we're having. Nothing wrong with it at all. And it can really help with your shopping. Bulk cook and freeze where appropriate. We know we have busy lives, don't we? So our sauces, our meat dishes, our bean dishes, we can cook those in advance. We can freeze those, and then we can cook our, our carb, our rice, our swallow. We can cook that. That usually is quicker, and serve the two together. Going to bed on time, as we've said, is really important. You've said this earlier, Joan. Check that you're not thirsty. Often thirst is mistaken for hunger. Have water close by. And if you're fasting, so if you're, religious, perhaps you're Christian or Muslim, again, plan what you're going to eat when you break that fast. Because when you do break and you've said your prayers or whatever, you're often quite hungry and your brain will tell you to go for something that's high in sugar. So plan what you're going to eat after, before you break your fast. Really important. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks so much, Shola. Thank you. And one of the things I wanted to highlight in what you said was about the breakfast and maybe making the breakfast a little bit later. And one of the things I've encountered in my clinical practice is what people call breakfast. So breakfast doesn't have to be a full plate of, meat, fish, bacon, sausage, beans, mushrooms, whatever it is that you would normally have. That doesn't have to be breakfast. As you quite rightly said, your breakfast could be some fruit. Your breakfast could be some sort of drink. But there are things that you can eat which don't have to be a full plate of food for breakfast. So, I mean, that's brilliant advice. And also the advice about sleep. And I think we really forget how important sleep is to our health. That is part of a healthy living. Diet, or let's call it eating. Exercise, or let's call it activity. But sleep is the other critical thing for good health. So it's really important, and that's been fantastic to hear those messages that you've given us. So now you're going to go on to talk about where we eat and how that's important as well. Over to you, Shola.